Hola, soy Alejandro Sahuquillo y estoy aquí hoy con el gran Jimmy Soni. Jimmy, thank you for accepting this interview. You've written such an amazing book, the founders, actually, the story of PayPal and the entrepreneurs who shaped Silicon Valley. And I have enjoyed it so much because it joins two of the passions that I have. One is Elon Musk, because I speak a lot about Tesla, SpaceX, not so much. And another are startups, because I had a startup, it failed, but I love all the startup world. So thank you for writing such a good book.
Well, thank you for the very kind and very enthusiastic words, and for having me on. I mean, I'm excited to talk with you.
As I've told you before, this book, or the people that have to read this book, the main character of this book is not clear, because there are like several founders and several second characters. But as in my channel we speak a lot about Tesla, I want that we focus this conversation on Elon Musk to understand his background, because I'm sure there's no place that we can understand better his PayPal time than your book. And I wanted to start by you say in your book that you had two meetings with Elon Musk, one in January 2019 and another in October 2021. How were these meetings with him?
Yeah, it's interesting because it's a great place to start. The reason I'm kind of smiling, or the reason that this is funny to me, is like you're taking me back, right? Like it's actually been a few years. But I would say this: during my chats with him, he was remarkably open and very gracious. And I'll give some specific examples, just so we're not speaking in abstractions. We were supposed to talk for like some 45 minutes or something at the SpaceX office on a Friday. And I think that was the day that they had some announcement of layoffs or something. This is in 2019. And, his team said, listen, we've had to change his schedule. I was kind of anticipating this. I mean, you sort of prepare for something like that. And they said, how much flexibility do you have? And I told them, I said, look, I'll make it work. You tell me what works for you. The constraint here is not me. It's what works for him and for your team. And they said, great, why don't you go to his house on a Saturday, and he has time in the afternoon and you guys could make it happen. And so I kind of like reorganize some things, and I go to his house, and I'm expecting, like, honestly, I came in expecting like maybe a half hour quick, chat about some things, because this is not a subject that's on his mind every day. And he's somebody who's very focused on that which is sort of on his mind, or really on his, the focus of his companies. We ended up talking for about 4 hours. And it was one of these kind of wide-ranging, really freewheeling, really funny conversations, but really substantive too. And it's one of these interesting things that I found him. Here's what I found that was so interesting. He is someone who does not speak from a prepared script or from talking points. And so every question you ask, you're actually getting like a fresh response. And that was sort of one interesting. The other thing is he's always reaching for humor. So there are a lot of jokes. I mean, you read the book. There are a lot of jokes in the book, and a lot of them come from Elon, because he has a capacity for like the humorous turn of phrase, or putting something in a way that is just hysterical. There's this moment in the book where he's describing what banking systems are in the late 1990s. And he goes on this kind of long tear about, well, it's this and this with the single database, and know this, and then at the end of it he goes, it's a herky-jerky frickin' monstrosity. I was like, there's two reasons it's funny. One is it's just funny the way the phrase, the sort of syllable structure, herky-jerky frickin' monstrosity, is just funny. But the other is, you expect technologists to speak in a certain way, like you expect their language to maybe be more staid, or kind of like just a little bit more boring, right? Maybe like more humdrum, but he's evocative. Like the way he puts things together is very evocative, but it was also very funny. And so there's a lot of moments Even when I was like listening to the audio of my interview with him, I was like, I was laughing. Like it was just a fun conversation. But I will say that the thing that I was most impressed with is that for somebody who has very little time, he made a lot of time, and he would respond to emails very regularly. He was very open about it. I mean, despite this not being like the crowning achievement in his career, right? He was very, very open with me, and actually also encouraged me to speak with a number of other people. And so, that's kind of the 10,000 foot level of my interactions with him. But he was very open and honestly just very, very candid about everything that happened.
And of course, these 2 interviews that you had with him, they're just a tiny, tiny part of the huge work that you made. I think there were 275 interviews, right? During 5 years. So you got to know not only Elon Musk, but also Dr. Nicholson, that he was his mentor and later his employer. You got to know most of his early employees. You got to know his competitors that later were colleagues when X.com, that was Elon Musk's company, merged with Confinity to do PayPal. Okay, PayPal was also the product, but for people. But I wanted to know, you get to know really, really well from Elon Musk's points of view and also from many other people, who was this Elon Musk of the PayPal time. So how would you describe him in 1 minute?
Ambitious, determined, and someone who operates in the truest sense from first principles thinking, meaning that once he has a conception of how an industry can be changed with technology, it's sort of like it's hard to unsee it. You can't go back. You can't put the genie back in the bottle. Once you see how bad the banking system is and how much the internet can do, you can't unsee that. Once you see the potential for electric cars, and then you see what technology could do, you can't unsee that. But I think the biggest thing about him that's the difference maker is what people have seen in industry after industry. There's a kind of dogged resilience there once he has an idea. That was true in the early days, and it was true. I mean, I would sort of say from Zip 2 to 2022, it's been true. And I don't think that's an exaggeration. I mean, I think you sort of see it just in the way he operates in the world. But that's how I would describe him. And that was probably over a minute.
No, but it's great because it's ambitious, determined, and first principles thinking. And I wanted to ask you, because this is connected to the Peter Thiel's quote that we wanted flying cars, instead we got 140 characters. We watch, I think you and myself watched the Back to the Future movies from the 80s. And it's true, like the revolution that we've had, they are mainly on screens. They are not physical. But there's this guy, Elon Musk, that he's actually doing flying cars. Actually, he's doing flying rockets, and also he's like doing cars that they will be able to fly with the SpaceX package to their roadster. So PayPal, they had so many interesting and huge minds that they created: LinkedIn, YouTube, Yammer, the Founders Foundation, Palantir. But Elon Musk is doing something different. So how would you describe it? Like, how different was the Elon Musk in PayPal from the other great minds that you were able to meet?
Well, I think, my honest answer might be unsatisfying, but I'll give you a more satisfying version at the end. My honest, unsatisfying answer is there were some parts of him that were very similar to his colleagues like Max Levchin and Peter Thiel and Reid Hoffman and David Sachs and, the 200 plus other people. There was some way in which he had to be similar. They're all working in Silicon Valley. They're all kind of, around the same age, roughly, right? And I would say that those common threads are, many of the people in the interview, the story that I interviewed, some of the names some of the names you don't, are just ferociously intelligent, right? I mean, you just have a sort of off the charts intelligence, and he shares that quality. There's a kind of a nerdiness, right? He loves video games. I wrote this long piece that was based on the book that was all about his love of video games, and he loved StarCraft and he loved Street Fighter, right? And I got into this because people would play those stories back to me. They would say, "Oh, I remember playing Elon in Street Fighter. He was like the best Street Fighter player ever," right? So there's a kind of nerdiness, and then there's also this love of technology. And what I would say makes him just a little different. Here's where the difference is. And I could go into some more of the similarities, because actually the similarities are really interesting. Let me give you one more that's unexpected. You would be astonished at how widely read he is. So he reads very, very widely and has since he was a kid. And I first was like...
Sorry to interrupt you, because I say it in my videos, people don't speak that much about that part of him, about how much he's read like during the early days.
Yeah. Yeah, no, and maybe, look, this is maybe like... I mean, I like readers. Obviously, I'm a writer, so I have a certain fondness for people who read books, and that's like just I'm sort of talking my own book, right? It's like I have to give that disclaimer. But what I would say is here's the way I know that to be true. That's not just like an apocryphal thing, because you could imagine a scenario in which people just say he reads books, but he doesn't actually read, right? But there were sort of 2 or 3 things that happened. One was that I had heard this sort of story about how his family would refer to him as the encyclopedia, and then what happened is that he was like at the library, the local library, and he had read all the books in the local library, and then he decided to read the encyclopedia all the way through from A to Z, and at first I was like, I don't know, this feels like, George Washington chopping down the cherry tree and then telling the truth or whatever. But then I actually found this amazing thing in the archives of the Daily Pennsylvanian. And it was a little like posting, like when you graduate college, sometimes your parents will like take out an ad like with your baby photo congratulating you and whatever. And I went, as you know, I did a lot of research for this book, and one of the weird places I spent a lot of time researching was the Daily Pennsylvanian. And I found this ad that his mom took out, and I don't know if she paid for it or if it was just one of those things you submitted, but it says like, it's a little photo from his childhood, and it says like, "Thank you, Elon, for being such a wonderful son, business manager, and encyclopedia," right? And I was like, oh, that's interesting. But that's sort of one little piece of evidence. The second piece of evidence was when, in my discussions with him, part of the reason that he uses language so fluidly and flexibly is because he also dots his reference, like he dots literary references throughout our discussions, right? So when we were talking about, I asked him why, after being removed as CEO from PayPal, he did not attack the company. Why didn't he flame everybody who overthrew him? Why didn't he attack Peter and all these other people? And he, instead of just saying to me like what the answer was, he actually made a biblical reference. So he went back to the story of King Solomon and Solomonic judgment. And it was just an interesting reference because, again, like you're thinking you're an engineer, you're in Silicon Valley, you're a CEO, maybe you're reading business books. But like his story was about the 2 women who come before the king and say they both claim to be mothers of a baby. And King Solomon says, let's split the baby in half, but it's actually just a test to see who the real mother is. And one of the women says, no, just let, et cetera, et cetera. But he has a few of these moments where he'll make literary references. And I would say that that's actually one of the things he has in common with a lot of other people at the top. Like I would discover that they had this like passion for books. And maybe that's obvious. Maybe it's obvious, except like you said, it's the thing that nobody really writes about or appreciates or like talks about. Granted, that's probably because there's like, if someone's putting rockets into space, like you're not going to ask them about their book collection, right? Like I get it, except that it's one of the things that I saw that he had in common with a lot of the other people at PayPal is that you wouldn't expect the range and variety of the things they read. Now, where he's different, this is what's interesting. When I interviewed people who were in and around him at college or just after college, one of the things that they mentioned is that since that time, he has had a passion for electrical energy and space exploration. And not like I'm going to read a little bit about it type of passion, but a serious, rigorous thought process about how these technologies would come to life. His early internships alongside the bank were a video game company in Silicon Valley and Pinnacle Research, which was like an energy research firm, right? And they were working on ultracapacitors and batteries. his college papers were about batteries, right? His discussions with his then boss and mentor, Dr. Peter Nicholson, are about space and like the physics of space. So here's how that makes him a little bit different. He's followed those passions for 4 decades or 3 decades, right? I mean, that is, I don't know about you, but like that's a hard way to live your life, right? It's very hard to take a passion that you have when you were in your teen years and sustain it and make it a part of your business life later. Not everybody in the PayPal story is that way. A lot of these people came to Silicon Valley because of the enthusiasm around Silicon Valley, not necessarily because they had like a long-term vision of doing like space exploration and of electrical energy, right? In a way, the PayPal period in his life is a bit of a detour. Like the X.com, that's the name of Elon's half of the PayPal company. That's a bit of a detour from the end goals, and these are end goals that he has had from a very young age. So it's really what I think about a lot is there's a lot of criticism, like because people like Jeff Bezos and Richard Branson have gotten into the space game later in life. There's a perception that the only people who do this are kind of like people who come late, like Johnny come latelys, right? Who have a lot of money and can blow it all on rockets, right? I don't think that criticism is true, but where it's especially not true is with Elon Musk, because that passion dates back to college. So he's writing papers in college about the things that he is able to do as an adult in the world today. And so that's like one of the big differences is that his vision begins much earlier. You know, you could not say the same thing about Max Levchin. You certainly couldn't say the same thing about Peter Thiel in some ways, because Peter goes to law school and then becomes a derivatives trader for a while. But for Elon, there was always this sense, and this is more than just a sense, it's like sort of documented, right? That like the end goal was figuring out how to use technology to make mankind a multiplanetary civilization and to advance renewable and sustainable energy. And so that's the big key difference.
When you were telling like he's been consistent throughout 4 decades, it came out to my mind one sentence in your book that I hadn't read before. Is like Elon Musk, I think in Penn magazine or in some other university that he said like something like, when I was about to leave the Stanford PhD to move into SIP2, I was thinking, look, but I'm not a risk taker. So that is a big difference. And that I wanted to point it out because that gives hope to maybe young people that are watching this interview, that they're thinking, okay, Elon Musk, they're saying, oh, okay, he's super smart, he's super ambitious, he's super determined, but he wasn't a risk taker. So it's good, like young people that are watching and read your book, they realize that they can become some other kind of people if they take risks, moderate risks.
Yeah,
yeah.
Oh, go ahead.
No. Yes.
Oh, well, you picked up on like one of my absolute favorite things in the book that nobody has picked up on, like specifically in an interview until now. So I'm like so happy that you picked up on it, because it took a lot of work to find that nugget and a lot of reading. So here is like one of the classic tropes, because he is successful and because he is admired and because he is the subject of criticism and because he is wealthy, we assume that this is a person that is immune to anxiety. We assume he's immune to failure. We assume he's immune to heartbreak. We maybe even assume that he sort of figured it out all along. And you could even take the statement that I just made about him having a vision for his life and a vision for what technology could do and misinterpret it as saying he had all the right answers or that he knew exactly how this would work out, right? In fact, he didn't. And one of the key moments that I found was, so he, like many other undergraduates, is struggling with this question of, look, I have these ideals for my life and I have a vision for what technology could do, but how do I actually like make this happen? Like, I don't have money, he doesn't come from money. He's sort of figuring himself out as an immigrant in the United States. He's not somebody who's like, he doesn't quite know what to do. And he's debating whether to go do a PhD program at Stanford, which he'd been admitted to, or go do a technology startup in Silicon Valley. And this is at the time when, this is even pre the PayPal era, when Netscape it's sort of between Netscape's IPO and PayPal's creation. So the internet's hot. he sort of sees it, but he's figuring himself out. He's a young kid in the United States who is going to have a college degree and is trying to figure out, what do I do with my life? And he after the success of Zip 2, he's interviewed by the Daily Pennsylvanian. And instead of an interview where you expect somebody like that to like have a lot of brashness and arrogance, it's actually this interview where he said, look, I was pretty conflicted about not saying yes to the PhD program because I had student loans and I had debt and I had a scholarship there, and it would have like been an easier path, right, for me to go do that. And he said, I'm not a born risk taker. Right. And that's so interesting to me because the popular conception is he's a huge risk taker. And I think in some respects, even if he wasn't readily willing to admit it, I mean, the risks he has taken with his personal finances in terms of investing in companies and sort of betting the farm, those are big risks. I think maybe they're not big risks to him, but they're big risks to you and I, right? Like the mere mortals of us are not going to stake everything in like, one final test of a rocket or one final success story for Tesla. But at the time, he doesn't see himself as a born risk taker. And that's really, really interesting. It was so interesting to me to find that nugget and then to peel it back and say, and just ask other people around him in his life and say, like, what was the thinking? And even Dr. Nicholson says, we took this long walk in Toronto trying to, like Elon was figuring out, like, do I go get a PhD, sort of like Dr. Nicholson did, or do I go do this internet thing? And so it's interesting to me because I think that's like hopefully it's what part of what the book achieves is it's just a lot of the contemporary writing about these people is so it's kind of so basic and it's got like all the usual tropes, right? It's lifestyles of the rich and famous, as opposed to saying like, let's look at what 19-year-old Elon Musk was thinking about his PhD versus, sort of grad school versus a quote unquote real job versus, doing a startup. And in fact, he tries to get a real job. He sends an application into Netscape, and then he goes and stands in the lobby of Netscape's building because he doesn't hear back about his application. And he thinks that by standing in the lobby, he's going to start a conversation with somebody, but he's too shy to talk to anybody. So he just like leaves. And it's one of my favorite moments in the book because what it does is it reminds people you don't have to have it all figured out. You really don't. And even someone who was this successful didn't at that time. He came here with very little and he has risen very far. And there is something about that story and about the anxiety and about not being a born risk taker that I think speaks to the not risk taking part of all of us.
Yes, it was amazing when I read it. I will link the article because I read afterwards the whole article and it's really interesting. And coming back to nowadays, people say, okay, one of the key parts from Elon Musk's success is his capacity to recruit. And most of the people, they say, okay, he's a great recruiter because he's such a smart person. He has such a broad mind and with such ambitious mission. He's also very popular. But one part that was really well explained in your book, and that later also with Eric Berger, the writer of Liftoff, he explained not only me in the book, he explained this part that in PayPal, you explain how he was able to recruit Bhagava, or how he tried to recruit Bhagava. So I want you to tell us this anecdote. How was it?
Yeah, again, Alejandro, you're picking up on like all of the subtle things that I hoped would get attention when I wrote the book, because this is, I think, the underrated quality that people do not appreciate because for whatever reason, right? But actually, he is probably one of the best talent recruiters and talent magnets in the world. And again, it's underappreciated because it's like not something that's very sexy, right? It's not the Met Gala. It's not something splashy, but being a good recruiter is sort of intimately tied to being successful at that level in business, because what you're really trying to do is sort of compound your own skills, but you've got to find people who are smarter than you, better than you, know other things. So to the story of Sanji Bhagava. Sanji Bhagava is one of my favorite people that I interviewed during the entire PayPal process. I think Sanjay actually works at SpaceX now. If memory serves, that he's back with Elon years later. He's back with Elon. Sanjay he had worked in a bank for a long time, and he'd sort of become disenchanted with traditional financial services, and they're kind of like, he thought they were too narrow-minded in their thinking. So he goes off and does a startup of his own. I believe it was called ZipPay. And he gets pushed out. There's some sort of weird thing that happens, and he's sort of like, this is a classic story. He sort of gets pushed out. And he's thinking, like, I'm just going to go back to my life in banking. But along the way, he had a meeting or an encounter with the same venture capitalist who was investing in X.com, Elon's company. And this venture capitalist says, Sanji, you should really go meet with Elon. And he says, okay. So they get in touch over email. And Sanjay says, I'll meet with you the next time I'm in the Bay Area. No big deal. And Elon says, no, I'm sending you a ticket. Can you fly down like tonight or tomorrow? And so there's this, and so Sanjay's kind of taken aback. And he says, okay, fine. So he goes, and Sanjay's like, at this point, I think in his like late 30s or early 40s. Elon's like 20 something, right? He's fresh off of Zip2. So Sanjay flies down, and he's expecting like a really quick meet and greet with this sort of young tech CEO. They meet at 8 p.m. at a burger joint, and the conversation goes from roughly 8 p.m. to about 4 o'clock in the morning. So they talk for something like 7 or 8 hours in Sanjay's recollection. And at the end of the discussion, Elon looks at him and says, so can you come in at 7 a.m. to sign your offer letter and to get your offer letter? I'd love for you to join. All right. And again, Sanjay's sort of taken aback, like, wow, he moves so quickly. There's a few ways to end this particular anecdote, and the anecdote gets better in the book because Sanjay has this kind of actually what happens that's not in the book is that both Sanjay and Elon immediately realize they've sort of agreed to get married, but they want to date a little while first. And because Sanjay appropriately is like, look, you're very young and I get the ideas are very big, but how is this going to be successful? And Elon says, you've spent a long time working at banks and we're trying to disrupt the bank, so I want to make sure you haven't learned a bunch of bad habits, right? So they actually go into this period of like he works as a contract employee for a little while and then he hires him after. But the two interesting things about it, one, Elon was right on the money about hiring Sanjay Bhagava. He was somebody who, according to other colleagues and also per his contributions to the company, had a kind of visionary instinct about financial services and helped to develop one of like the signature fraud fighting products that the company creates. That's kind of one thought. The second is it shows again and again how when Elon had found somebody that he was really passionate about hiring, he moved super quickly. This is also documented in Eric's book, Liftoff, about SpaceX, which is a great book, by the way. He just moves so rapidly and tries to remove essentially like every hurdle between them and signing up for the company, right? So Sanjay's living, I believe, in New York at that time, and Elon like lets him like work remotely a little while, but then it's like, okay, now that the contract period's done, you've got to move here. Their whole family moves, it's a whole thing. But he has an eye for talent that is, I would say, unsurpassed, but then an ability to really persuade people to join him. It's one of the things that a few people in the story said. They said, when I would finish, so there was this person Amy Clement, who becomes really important in this story. And Amy was going to graduate school. She was headed off to grad school. And she meets with Elon and she says to me sort of in this funny way, she's like, at the end of the meeting, I kept thinking like, yeah, why isn't the financial services system better? Like, that's just crazy. Why are they charging us so many fees? Why is it more efficient? And he's very persuasive about creating a compelling vision that people can get behind. And so I think of it as a great gift. And it's one of those things that we should understand more because it's the kind of thing that can make the difference between landing top talent and not.
By the way, the Eric Berger that we were speaking about, Liftoff, the part that this anecdote that you've explained really well reminded of is like when Elon Musk is trying to hire an SpaceX engineer, and he said, look, I cannot transfer to LA because my wife just got a job in Alphabet, okay, actually in Google, in San Francisco. And Elon Musk said, don't worry, we will figure it out. So then he makes a second meeting with him and he said, you don't have to worry anymore. I called Larry Page and I made a transfer to your wife to Los Angeles that they have an office. So now you can come, right? And he said, okay.
That's great. So I'll give you one more that is probably one of the shining examples. So today, Roelof Botha is the head of Sequoia Capital. He's one of the most powerful venture capitalists in the world, and he oversees one of the biggest venture capital firms in the world and one of the most consequential. When he first interacted with Elon Musk, Roelof Botha was a graduate student at Stanford Business School, and like many others, was trying to figure out what to do with his life. He meets this guy, Elon Musk, and Elon is passionate and inspired and wants him to join this company X.com. And Roelof says, I'm on like a student visa and I'm not going to go join your startup. No, thank you. But it was really nice to meet you. Elon tries again. So he keeps staying in touch with him and just sort of aggressively is like, no, you have to do this. And finally what happens is that Roelof faces a personal financial crisis. There's a downturn in the South African currency and he just needs money. So he writes back to Elon and says, can I come work part-time? That part-time job leads to a full-time job later. But it shows something because in time, Roelof becomes like a 25 or 26-year-old CFO. He helps to take the company public. And now he oversees, he's widely regarded as just like an insane talent. And it says something that at that moment, Elon had an instinct about this person. And Roelof actually said, yeah, Elon sort of pulled me into the cubicle next to him and that was it. But I think that if you look at the range of people in the company, Sandeep Lal, Sanjay Bhargava, Todd Pearson, Roelof Botha, Amy Clement, on and on. I could go through the entire roster, and a lot of them they're recruited by, or certainly aggressively sourced by Elon. And so I think it's one of the things that we miss about his story because it's not controversial to cover that. But it is interesting from the perspective of running a business that one of his great gifts is finding talent, but then essentially sort of being he just won't give up once he has somebody that he really wants.
And apart from the determination in Tesla and SpaceX, everybody says, okay, he, as we've said before, people want to work with him also because he has a great vision, this super ambitious vision to conquer Mars and make energy renewable and also make now humanoid robots. But when you think about PayPal, you say, okay, it's just to transfer money. But what it was interesting for me, let me find it, is you explained that Julie Anderson, an X.com employee, or she was the number 5, she said something like, I like to have something to believe in. And she said, and Elon was always talking about changing the world and doing something good for humanity. And I think later or before you also say right from the beginning, Elon was thinking this X.com to do this super ambitious thing to do something good for humanity. So can you explain how this vision of Elon Musk was and how was able to spread it throughout the company?
Yeah. So, let me do it. Let me do my bad kind of compare contrast, right? So if I came to you, Alejandro, and I said, I want you to come work at an email payment services company, come join me, right? You'd be like, thanks, but no thanks. That doesn't sound that interesting. I mean, maybe it does, but in 1999, it didn't sound that interesting. But then if I come to you and say, Alejandro, the banks, the big banks have been robbing the public blind, and we are going to disrupt and defeat them, and we are going to revolutionize banking forever, right? That's a much more compelling vision.
I would say you're a crypto guy. I would say you're a Kryptonian.
Yeah, today you'd say that. In 1999, that terminology wasn't around as much. Yeah. But I would say that's sort of this. There's this outlining of what the biggest, highest possible outcome could be for the thing that you want to do, and to recruit people, right? It becomes really compelling to share that narrative and to express that narrative. Now, does the narrative come true exactly on all the ways that you described? No, because startups never do. But there was a way in which what he was doing was not describing the first level of what the company could do. It was kind of the nth degree, right? Sort of it was saying, like, if we did everything we wanted to do, if X.com was doing mortgages and loans and we were able to do brokerage accounts and everything, even later when he was talking to me, he said, I wanted X.com to be the global financial system. I didn't want to change. I wanted it to be the global financial system. That's a super compelling vision to someone, who's figuring out what to do next with their lives, right? And so you have this capacity. I think of it, there's that great quote, and I don't know who it's attributed to, but there's that great quote about, like, if you want to get people to go on to help you build a ship or something, don't teach them about, like, the wood and about, like, don't give orders or whatever. Teach them to yearn for the vast and endless sea, right? And, like, that is, I think, but there's a difference there. It's actually that's a narrative exercise. Like, do you focus on the particular details of exactly what the company is going to do, or do you sort of teach them to yearn for the vast and endless sea? In this case, what he's describing is a revolution in finance, right? And it is a revolution that has heroes, right? So he and X.com are the heroes. It has villains, right? So it's like the big banks, like Citibank and JP Morgan. These guys are terrible, and we're gonna defeat them. We're gonna disrupt them. It has drama, right? Are we gonna win? Are we gonna lose? What's the government gonna do? What are regulators gonna do, right? And it has a setting. The setting is Silicon Valley, where the technology to potentially do this has been made possible, right? So that's a narrative exercise, sketching out that portrait of what a company could be. And I think people are too quick to dismiss it. That's a really hard thing to do. Some of the greatest entrepreneurs in the world have done that, right? Like, what they do is sell a story about what something could be. And it has the advantage of also being a very successful way to recruit people, because, like you said, Julie Anderson mentioned that part of what they were trying to do was, Elon would say, people are getting screwed by the banks. Like, the fees that they take aren't justified, given that the internet has reduced the cost of information transfer. So if information transfer's cost has gone down, why am I still paying wire fees, right? If you can move bits through wires at basically no cost, then why am I charged for things? Why are there transaction fees? Why do people have to pay to move stock around, right? Now, some of this, by the way, has become true. There are basically no cost stock trading these days is essentially no or low cost, right? But he's sketching out that vision at a time when that's not true. And so there's a quality that's very attractive about that. And so I think of it as, like, the narrative piece, the sketching of the story, is part of what it means to build a company from scratch like this.
And also for the narrative, it really struck me, like, because when I read on some of the viewers read the story of Tesla and SpaceX, 2008 was a critical time with the financial crisis. He had to put all his money. He said, okay, I put all the money, and if they go bankrupt, I will have to sleep in your parents' house. I think he said to Justin Musk, his first wife. But what I didn't know is, like, in X.com, the feeling, at least for the employees, was more or less similar. So there's one quote from Mac, an engineer before the merge from Musk, that he said he could bet his last penny to make that happen. So can you tell us, like, how was that?
Yeah, it's another thing that is easily missed, because I think sometimes people will look at those stories that you described about Tesla and SpaceX and say that can't possibly be true, that sort of. But I had both documents, and I had interviews with other employees who had nothing to do with his later companies, right? So Doug Mack, the person you referenced, we had a fantastic interview. He lives in Germany, and he was an early X.com employee. I mean, you're sort of like, this was his job right after some other corporate job, and there was a lot of drama early at X.com. And Doug describes what happens after that drama, which is essentially that there was this group of senior executives who try to take over the company and try to change the strategic direction and push Elon out in the process. And Elon sits down with each of the employees and kind of pitches them the case. He says, here's why you should stay with me and not go with them. And one of the things that Doug said that I did not prompt, I didn't, this is because Doug has no relationship with his other companies, right? But Doug said he was somebody that if he said he was going to do something, he would bet his last penny to make it successful. In the case of X.com, he takes the vast majority of his windfall from Zip2 and invests it into X.com as its sort of seed financing round. So he has, he walks away with like around $20 million, 21, I think, from the sale of Zip2. I don't know if that's pre-tax or post-tax, but then puts 12.5 million into X.com almost right away. So more than 50% of his fortune. And it's an astonishing moment. I mean, just think about what I just said, right? Which is you have the opportunity to retire, to live on a beach, do whatever you want for the rest of your days, and you decide you're going to take more than 50% of your earnings and put them into this new entity. And when the new entity is like not a sure thing, it's not like you're putting it into Vanguard funds, right? Like it's not like you're going to get dividends on your startup investment, right? And so there's this quality of being willing to have skin in the game, of being willing to bet everything that distinguishes him from other entrepreneurs in his generation, certainly. But I would say that as you saw in the book, employees remembered this. I was interviewing them 20 plus years after some of these events happened, and they still remembered calling prospective recruits and saying, oh yeah, the CEO of the company has most of his money in the company, right? Because it's compelling, because it makes people think, well, if he's going to bet everything, then it's surely going to be a success. And you could debate whether or not that's true, but there is something powerful about that, and it's something that stood with his employees. Like I think that one of the key things that I noticed, and again, I didn't come into this, by the way, Alejandro, like your listeners might not know me, but I'm not a tech journalist. I don't write about Elon. I'm a historian, so I write sort of older stories. And I kind of went into this project like trying to sort of treat it as though I was writing a biography of a company, not a biography of a person. But one of the things I learned about Elon as a boss, right, because he's one of the bosses of the company that I wrote about, is that his employees have a great deal of loyalty and affection, and part of the reason is that he works enormously hard. And so it's not just skin in the game financially. There was an appreciation from everyone at the company that any of the stresses that they were under, he would put himself under too. And I was talking to employees who don't normally talk to the press and who aren't famous and have no dog in this fight. They don't, many of them don't work at his contemporary companies. They feel grateful for the time they had. And they would say, oh yeah, like when we were there on Friday nights and Saturday nights, he was there too, right? It was unexpected because it wasn't the usual sort of operating style of other executives, but it endeared him to them in a pretty powerful way.
And it's great that you mentioned, because I was going to ask you about the Elon Musk's honeymoon that is really famous in your book. And also it was heard before that there was this scoop that they kicked him out from being a CEO. But I didn't know one part that you explained, that actually that trip wasn't only a honeymoon plan for Elon Musk. He was thinking to do some other things. So what was he thinking to do?
Yeah. It's interesting because he I think that he's somebody who his life is an exercise of vast multitasking, right? And he actually had to delay the honeymoon the first time. And then this honeymoon, which was set to be in August of 2000, he calls it a honeymoon combined / financing trip. So he's actually going to go and meet with different people to raise money for X.com. And he's going to the London office, I believe, to check in there. And there's a couple of other things that are happening. But that's the moment when, when some of his senior executives and some employees at the company make a move against him for a variety of reasons. There are some differences of opinion on some important things. And but it was never just going to be a pure honeymoon. He was going to the Olympics, and he kind of it's a pretty powerful moment. It's a sad moment in some ways. Half the company was recruited by him. Those people are not happy to see the person that recruited them leave. But it's a honeymoon combined fundraising trip, as he describes it. And he's described that, by the way, just to make clear for the record, he's described it that way in a couple places. He definitely did with me, but it is, I think, I think that one of the things is that someone like this who is trying to do the things that he's trying to do just has. It's easy to pretend like you don't have to work hard, or once you sort of achieve success, like it all gets easier. Absolutely not. I mean, he works. My perception, I'm not reporting on him day to day, but my perception is he works as hard today as he did during the PayPal years. And that's because the scale of the challenges have gotten bigger, whether that is, self-driving technology or reusable rockets. And I don't cover those subjects, so like other people are more knowledgeable there. But the thing that happened was the combined honeymoon and financing trip that did not end as well as they might have hoped.
Yeah, I was amazed, because imagine from the point of the bride that you say, okay, finally after so much stress we're getting the honeymoon, and he says, yeah, but I'm going to meet with this and that and that. So imagine from her perspective.
It's a very fair point, but I think. Look, I suppose, and again, I didn't write about this or cover it too much. I suppose that it would sort of be part of the territory. I mean, I don't know.
Jimmy, I wanted to ask you something, because I've done a video of the 10 years of the Model S, because it was the first deliveries was 10 years ago in the Spanish channel, and I was reviewing everything. And I think there's one characteristic of Elon Musk that is not spoken that much. Is like when he went to buy the new Me plant in Fremont, it was $1 billion that it was owned by GM and Toyota, and he was able to get it from, I don't know if it was $40 or $50 million. But later, also I read that he was able also to buy a painting shop that it was like $500 million for $40 or $50 million. And also a stamping press that it was, I think, like $50 million for $6 million. Okay, the figures might vary, but it was not like a 10% discount. It was like huge discounts. So I wanted to ask you, because you explained how the merger of X.com, Elon Musk, and Confinity, Levchin, and Thiel starts, and he's super hard negotiating. So can you explain this characteristic of Elon Musk?
Yeah, it's interesting. I didn't know that about the other purchases, because obviously I didn't write about Tesla, so I can't confirm those necessarily. But I did have a few moments where I had sort of the hard negotiating come into play, the most dramatic of which is when, so just to give your listeners who may not have read the book a bit of background, PayPal, properly understood, as the merger of two companies. There's Elon Musk's company, X.com, and there's Peter Thiel and Max Levchin's company, Confinity, and Confinity had birthed a product called PayPal. And at one point, X.com, which also had an email services product, was competing pretty intensely against PayPal. And they were both like sort of jockeying for market share, right? And some people on both sides start to say, well, look, this is crazy. We're going to destroy each other if we keep competing against each other. We should combine. And there's some initial meetings and discussions. And what's really interesting, actually, to me is that, we're talking about Max Levchin and Peter Thiel. These are very impressive people in their own right. They're very smart. And they kind of are like, they look at this Elon guy and they're like, wow, he's really smart too, right? And Elon looks at them and is like, okay, these guys are pretty smart too, right? And that actually rarely happens in the lives of these individuals, right? So I had this funny experience because I got to interview each of them. I got that reaction from each of them. So it was like, Max was like, yeah, I remember meeting Elon and being like, this guy's completely crazy, but he's really, really smart, and I really like smart people. And Elon has this great line where he said something like, they could keep up with me, and I'm pretty good at technology. So if you can keep up with me, respect. He was like, respect. And so that was pretty cool. So they're competing. There's some talks about merging. From Elon's perspective, his firm is the bigger firm. It has more money. He has more credibility because he's already had a successful startup exit. He has Sequoia Capital backing him. He has all the pedigrees. He holds all the cards. So he wants a very lopsided merger, right? He wants it to be like, I don't know, whatever it was. I wrote it in the book, but 90-10, 80-20, whatever it was.
Yeah, 90-10.
And so he wants Confinity to be the junior partner because he's like, look, I have actually done this before, and I've sold a company and I've been successful. You all are just getting started. And on the Confinity side, there's a similar level of like, wait, but we have, more users on eBay and we could still win. And so there's some disagreement and some discord. There are a couple of people in the story who identify that, look, this is just, we can't battle this way. Like, we're going to lose if we are both fighting each other. But Elon tries to hold the line on a very aggressive, you're going to be the junior partner, like meaning that not aggressive necessarily, not in a mean-spirited way, but just in a, I believe that we are the bigger entity and we should be acquiring you, not merging with you, right? And people can read about the drama and about how it ends up as a merger. But I think that, like, again, it sort of, we say that story, and I'm also like, that makes complete sense. Like, logically, it would just make sense. He believes that he's building a bigger entity. He believes X.com is going to do all things financial, where Confinity's PayPal is just doing digital payment transfer, like meaning email payments. So in that universe, if you're trying to do credit lines and if you have a relationship with Barclays Bank and if you have this and if you have these other products, you would naturally believe that, like, this is just going to be one small component of my much bigger business. And if you look at it from that perspective, it doesn't seem like he's negotiating hard for the sake of negotiating hard. He's negotiating hard because he believes that their value is lower than the total potential value of X.com. So it makes sense. Like, from his perspective, it makes total sense. And obviously from the other side, it made sense that they didn't want to, be a junior partner. But that's how I interpret the story, kind of, with the benefit of 20 years of hindsight.
That was really interesting. Jimmy, some of the viewers of my channel are Tesla fans and some others are also Tesla investors. And I liked one anecdote of your book that is full of anecdotes, not only of Elon Musk, but of like so many different people. And it was this engineer called William Wu that he said that there was a huge difference between being an Elon Musk worker and an investor. Can you tell it to us?
It's one of the funnier lines in the book. And the cool thing about William Wu is, William Wu was completely, nobody knows who, he's not a famous figure. He's not trying to be famous, but he was an early engineer at X.com and PayPal. And he says, he's got this great line. He says, he had seen what was required to work at the company that Elon ran. And he was there during the period in which Elon was CEO. And he said he remembered, like, basically that the expectation was that even after a late Friday night of work, you would be back in work on a Saturday. So then he kind of, with me, he cuts and he goes, yeah, man, working with him was so painful, but as an investor, it's a great decision, right? So he invested very early in Tesla as a result, because he said, I had direct experience of what it's like to work with this person. And I just knew he was going to set a very high standard for total amount of work done. And that I think if I were to go one level deeper and describe it, I think he expected that with Elon in charge of something like Tesla, you would have a 7-day-a-week culture that was just going to drive until it won. Whereas if you were at a traditional car maker, that wasn't necessarily going to happen. Now, I don't know how much precision is involved in any of these decisions. And William and I didn't go too deeply down this rabbit hole, but it has the virtue of being true and kind of aligning with the facts. I think if you were working at a lemonade stand company that was run by the Boring Company, you'd probably be the hardest lemonade stand worker in the world, right? It would stand to reason based on everything we've seen of the other companies that Elon is involved in. But for William Wu, it was really funny because he has this great moment of, like, he's a worker, and then he's like, nah, he's like, that's going to be super painful. I can be an investor, and he was, grateful for the chance to do that.
Actually, today I had the chance a few months ago to interview Joe Justice and Farzad Mesbahi, different Tesla workers in different parts of the company, and they don't work anymore, but they are heavily invested in Tesla. So they have seen what it's been working there and what they're doing. So that resonated to me with the William Wu story.
By the way, can I just say something? This is actually one of the things that we miss about the like, people ask, like, well, how can you do this? How could someone like Elon have done, these different industries, like kind of digital advertising or sort of that, let's call it that, but Zip2 wasn't quite that, but call it digital advertising and kind of the yellow pages for the internet, then financial services, then rockets, then infrastructure, solar energy, and electric vehicles and electrical battery and manufacturing and capacity building. Part of the playbook is that Silicon Valley just does work harder. I mean, like, there's no real, like, there is this thing of I saw it when I was rigorously looking at the PayPal story. They knew banks were only going to work 9 to 5 Monday through Friday. They knew that X.com was going to be, 9 to 9 Monday through Sunday, right? And so in those hours would come fresh insights. Is it a perfect one-to-one? No, but I just think like this is part of the model. Part of the playbook is bringing that kind of intensity to other industries that have often become ossified or becomes, a little too slow moving. So I actually do think it's like part of the thing that makes Silicon Valley different from many other sectors of the economy.
Jimmy, as we are ending this interview, you are a magician, a wizard of words. So because of that, I want that we play one game that actually I played with all my guests. That is the one-word game. So I will give you one concept, and you just have to tell me the first word that pops to your mind, and you cannot repeat it. And you have to be really fast, okay?
Okay.
Are you ready, Mr. Jimmy Soni?
I am ready.
Okay, just tell me the one word that comes to my mind when I tell you Elon Musk.
Endurance.
Peter Thiel.
Strategy.
Work ethics of Elon Musk.
Peerless.
Max Levchin.
Engineer.
Elon Musk's intelligence.
Wide-ranging.
Elon Musk's attitude when he was kicked out as CEO of PayPal.
Frustrated.
PayPal's IPO.
A relief.
Elon Musk technical knowledge.
Deep.
And last but not least, Elon Musk competitiveness spirit.
Second to none.
Jimmy, it was a big pleasure. I want to tell like all the audience that have come so far, I will link your book in the description. And you've told me like before the interview that the Spanish version will be out soon, right?
Yes. There will be a Spanish translation of the book for viewers and for listeners. Sometimes the translations, like there's a delay, sort of my German translation just debuted, a few others, but the Spanish translation will be out very soon if you can't find it. And if you want updates on that, just follow me on Twitter and I can make sure that people know about it.
Apart from Twitter, you have your website, jimmysoni.com, right? And where else can they follow you?
I would recommend that and the books. I tend to keep my most of my written work and thinking goes into the books, and then I go quiet for periods of time.
Jimmy, thank you very much. But I want to end this interview with a tradition that I have in this channel, and it's the first sentence that I said in Spanish at the beginning. Hola, soy Alejandro Sahuquillo y estoy aquí para que triunfes. I want you to say it for yourself, that it means, hola, hi, I'm Jimmy Soni, y estoy aquí para que triunfes. It means, and I'm here for you to succeed. So it would be, hola, soy Jimmy Soni, y estoy aquí para que triunfes.
Hola. We might need to redo this. You can redo this, right? Hola. Soy Jimmy Soni, estoy aquí para que triunfes.
Perfect.
You live in the best moment in history. Enjoy! If you like this video, please give it a like, leave a comment, share it with the whole universe. And since I want to make interesting videos for you, I need to know what interests you. Write your suggestions. If you have enjoyed this type of content, subscribe to this channel so you won't miss any future videos. I'm working hard to make the best possible content for you, but it takes time. Consider supporting me in Patreon, the best moment in history, so I can stop living under a bridge and continue creating content for you. There's a link in the description. Thank you very much from the heart. Gracias.